Hello, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Ursula. I'm an indie author of historical fiction. I have 12 books published to date, and I've also had work published in 6 other anthologies. Today I'm going to be doing the Fab Four Book Tag, which was created by Tom L.A. Books, whom I met through his wonderful series of videos about Dante and the Divine Comedy. He seems like a really genuine bloke, and I always enjoy his videos, particularly his videos about the Divine Comedy, and this tag is like something really interesting I wanted to do. He did tag me in the comments, but I'm also been a second generation Beatlemaniac since the spring of 1993 when I was 13 years old and in the 7th grade. And I do believe down to the very core of my soul, if it hadn't been for my love of the Beatles, I might have, God forbid, taken my own life in the 8th grade. It was just, that horrible. And when I was having my car accident in August of 2003, one of the many things flying through my head as I thought I was about to die, I would see, John Lennon and George Harrison in the other world. And also, not to, promote myself too much, but I have mentioned the Beatles in one of my books, Little Ragdoll. There's an entire chapter about the first appearance on Ed Sullivan and on February of 1964, and their music are also mentioned throughout the book. And obviously, if you want to, read my book and talk to me about any of my books or interview me or such, or use them on your channel, you are more than welcome to. But they are, featured rather, prominently throughout the one book I've written set during the 1960s and the 1970s. And when I do also have had some previous videos about on John Lennon's 41st death anniversary and George Harrison's 20th death anniversary. I'll link to them down below. George is currently my favorite Beatle. He didn't start out my favorite Beatle, but over time he just became my favorite Beatle, and it just felt more and more right that he, would be more than just my favorite solo Beatle, but my favorite one overall. So let's get down to it, and hopefully I won't have to abort this recording like I did the first attempted recording. Number 1. I just fell out of bed, found out what key I had dreamt it in, and I played it. Paul McCartney, about yesterday. A book that you dreamt about, or that inspired one of your dreams. I know this will make me sound completely, morbid and macabre and depressing, but, the first book I ever read was, the adult version of Grimm's fairy tales at 3 years old that kind of influenced me throughout my life. I immediately thought of Volume 2 of the Gulag Archipelago by my favorite writer, Alexander Isayevich Solzhenitsyn, who is more than just my favorite writer. He's also one of my literary idols and one of my heroes, and I even dedicated one of my books to him. Well, he wasn't the only one dedicated to, but it was just, in his memory, because he's just such a wonderful influence on me. If not for him becoming my favorite writer, I'm not sure if my Russophilia would have been reawakened so strongly, or I would have taken that book in that direction I did when I finally got back to it after a hiatus of several years. He's just like a larger than life influence for me. So I read Volume 2 of Archipelago in early 2000 in my sophomore year of community college. I had read Volume 1 in my sophomore year of high school in the late spring of 1996, and unfortunately I have yet to read Volume 3, which I know is kind of embarrassing. I should have read all of my favorite writers' works by now, but anyway, I had this dream about the bones of the Zeki, that's slang for prisoner. The singular is Zek, and for a woman it's Zechka. The plural would be Zechki, and I dreamt about the bones of the Zeki who were like frozen, locked in the Bellamore Canal because they were using all this horrible slave labor to build this canal. I believe it was during the 1920s, and obviously the Zeki were dying of exhaustion and like hunger and disease, and sometimes they would just fall into the locks of the canal, and like because it's so cold out there in Siberia, they would become frozen there, and even after all this time, their bodies, their remains, their skeletons are still in those locks. So that's just something really creepy and morbid to think about. And of course, I would dream about that, and I'm not quite sure, but I've probably have dreamt about some of his other books over the years as well, including things in like Volume 1 and also other things in Volume 2. So if you've not read his books yet, I highly encourage you to check him out. He's just, I can't say enough things about just what a great influence he has been on my life, so much more than just like one of my favorite writers along with Dante. He's one of my literary idols, not just, someone whose writing I like or who I might like to hang out with in the other world. And just, if I had been born only 1 week late instead of 2 weeks late, we would have shared our birthday on December 11th. I was born on December 18, so that also just, makes me feel really, really close to him. Number 2, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, John Lennon. A book that talks about drugs, or that was written under the influence of drugs. I had to think about this one for a while. I finally came up with Brave New World by Aldous Huxley, which I read for the first time in my sophomore year of high school. I was in a class that was one grade ahead in English, so starting in the 7th grade, we were taking 8th grade honors English, and in the 10th grade, we were taking 11th grade honors English, and so that was one of the books we read this year. And throughout the book, the characters are taking a drug called Soma. They kind of have this sort of like quasi religious ceremony when it's basically just one huge orgy, and they're all getting, high on Soma, and sometimes it just really zonks them out. And I never understood why so many of my peers were making fun of that book. Particularly, there's one chapter, it might be chapter 3, but I know it's early on. It's deliberately done in montage style, so basically there are just all these various scenes with, different characters and things, and they just, like jumping back and forth between all these things, and the scenes are gradually getting shorter and shorter as the chapter wears on. And like so many of my peers were just making fun of that book, and I just never understood why. I liked probably 99% of the required readings we had to do in high school. I read it again in a literature course I took my sophomore year of community college, and loved it again. And I also read it independently a few years after I graduated university. I would definitely put it in one of my top 10 or 20 favorite books. It's just, a really fun, interesting book. And there's also a Russian novel, We, by Evgeny Zamyatin, which I read in my junior year of university in my modern Russian literature class. There were so many parallels between We and Brave New World. I did a compare and contrast paper about them. Like, for example, they've completely divorced love from sex. You're not allowed to fall in love or get attached to anybody. You have these like kind of sex tickets, and you can only be with that person on that, day or week, and you have to get approved. And like the windows are, well, I guess the windows are open sometimes, and sometimes the windows are closed. And there's also this wall similar to, there's an Indian and Native American reservation in Brave New World where people are still living normal lives untouched by like this modern, like conformist, hyper technological society. And there's this wall in the novel We, where there are also these people who are living a very comfortable, happy life, and they don't do things like they do in We. And also, that's interesting to note, it's probably one of the most un-Russian Russian novels you can ever think of. Like, apart from a bust of Pushkin in a house and then an old woman who kind of embodies the stereotype of a babushka, a grandmother, there's not really any hint at all this is supposed to be set in Russia or like written by a Russian. It's just completely, it could be set anywhere, just except for those few references. And I highly encourage you guys to check out both those books if you've not read them already. Number 3, We Thought We'd Be Really Big in Liverpool, Ringo Starr. A book about someone who had far more success than what they expected, or a book that was much more successful than what the author expected. To think about this one for a while, and I finally came up with Forever Amber by Kathleen Windsor, which was published in 1944. This was the debut novel for Mrs. Windsor, and obviously even in those days, writing a debut novel wasn't necessarily a breakout road to success, and it was also extremely long. It had to be cut by a fifth, although it's still extremely long even after it was edited. The modern paperback is 976 pages, but I had an old hardcover from 1945, which was the 16th printing, on 652 pages. The text is on 2 columns on each paper-thin page, and it was a plain green hardcover. I had put it in a box of special books I thought was going to come with me when I moved. Like, for example, also had Portable Dante translated by Lawrence Binyon, one of my Decameron translations, and my Russian dictionary, and Atlas my late uncle got me in 1986, and a few other really special books like a French dictionary from like 1905, 1910, but unfortunately it seems to have disappeared into storage with like 99% of my other belongings. And as I've mentioned many times, there's some drama with my brother, and unfortunately he's not shipping my belongings down to me where they belong, but hopefully they'll be back in my possession soon. And that's why I will be inserting images of these books, although I do physically own most of the books I'm talking about, and hopefully when they're back in my physical possession, I'll be able to do full book reviews of them and show them to you guys in person. I really, really miss my books and everything else that's in storage. And so anyway, getting back to Forever Amber, not only was it a breakout success, the title character Amber herself is also has much more success than she ever expected. She's born out of wedlock in the 17th century in England. Her parents were engaged, but things happened, and then their parents eventually forbade the relationship because they ended up on different sides of a political military conflict. And Amber had to go to someone else's house to give birth. She pretended she was a married woman, and she unfortunately died in childbirth. This isn't a spoiler, by the way. This happens very early on in the preface, I believe it is, or the prologue. And her Amber's mother, Judith, names her daughter Amber because the color of the eyes of Amber's father, John, were just a beautiful color of amber. And so basically, like, Amber grows up kind of like an unwanted, stepchild or just like a foster child. And when she's 16 years old, she makes this guy, Bruce, who is just becomes the love of her life. Bruce is 28 years old, but that age difference wasn't necessarily so creepy in that era because a 16-year-old was considered a fully adult woman. And there's many people have compared Gone with the Wind and Forever Amber because they're both, sprawling epic sagas, and they're like both Amber and Scarlet are proto-feminist characters. They have a lot of lovers and lots of many adventures and just wonderful, like, interesting things. I highly encourage you to check both of these books out. And the book was banned in Boston because it was like considered so sexy and salacious and scandalous. But when I read it, I was kind of, underwhelmed by the so-called sexy reputation. Yes, Amber obviously does have many lovers, and she has a number of abortions, and, she just things that they didn't like acknowledge in polite society in that era. And so basically she goes from like a bastardess to the mistress of the King of England, although her heart always belongs to Bruce. And just at the end of Gone with the Wind, when Scarlet finally realizes Red is the only man for her, and she's acted like a total, clown chasing after the wrong man all these years, and she has to do whatever she can to like get him back. Amber also realizes, Bruce is my man. I've got to, go to sail to like North America to like, try to get him back and convince him once and for all, we only belong together. So she basically goes this like totally huge, unexpected, like not reversal, just, increase in fortune. Like, she was like a child out of wedlock, and then she's the king's mistress, and just wonderful, like, privilege she never dreamt of. But anyway, the book really isn't like as sexy as its reputation, at least not by modern standards. There are absolutely no sex scenes, no like curse words worse than hell or damn that I can remember. And the closest thing to something like salacious is when the sleazy Duke of Villiers pays Amber for a night of sex that's so like disgusting and perverted it turns even Amber's stomach. But we're not never told exactly what this like sexual act entails that she thinks is so like horrific and gross. So just keep that in mind if you read the book. Despite its like sexy, scandalous reputation, it's really, really quite mild by modern standards, and I do highly recommend you to check out this book. It's just this great, wonderful, sprawling epic if you like epic stories, and just wonderful things. I can't say enough about it, and I'm sorry if I'm rambling. Number 4, Sitting on a Cornflake, Waiting for the Van to Come, John Lennon, which is a lyric from I Am the Walrus. A surreal book, or a book with some surreal elements that you enjoyed. I thought about this one for a while too. I eventually came up with Steppenwolf by Hermann Hesse, who is my second favorite writer, and I do realize that sounds really pretentious, that I would overpronounce it in a German way. I read that book when I was 19, turning 20, so very, very late 1999. It's one of the books that most changed my life. I realized I was kind of like the title character Harry Holler, like he was kind of, boring, doesn't know how to have fun. He's always too serious all the time, and I will not pretend I suddenly became this super extrovert and stopped having, serious interests. But it's just, we do have some things that are in common, and sometimes you do, need to lighten up more and learn to be one of the people a little more, not just like living totally in your own head as an intellectual. And there's, famously the magic theater in the book, which is all these like surreal things are happening. Like, for example, at one time Harry grabs Mozart's pigtail and it turns into a comet, and there's just really interesting things. If you read my blog, it's called Welcome to My Magic Theater, although I spell magic the Wiccan or the magic way, Magic instead of the, pulling rabbits out of the hat way with an Magic. And it's just a wonderful book. I would highly recommend to you guys. It's, as I said, it's one of the books that most changed my life. I'm really looking forward to reading my Hesse books when they finally get back into my physical custody. I'm even thinking of possibly taking a third suitcase when I make Aliyah move to Israel, which will hopefully be this year, to just have my Hesse novels in it. Most of them are mass market paperback size, so they will fit, and obviously the other books would go into that suitcase as well because they would be, too important to let out of my custody again after so long without them. Number 5, The White Album. A book you love that A, has a minimalist cover, or B, is written in a minimalist style. I also had to think of this one for a while too. I eventually came up with Fragments of Isabella and Saving the Fragments by the late Isabella Leitner, and it was later combined into one book, which I do have also unfortunately in storage, just simply called Isabella. And she was a Holocaust survivor from Kisvárda, Hungary. She was one of 6 children who survived childhood, but as I later found out, there were actually 8 children total. There were twin boys born after what I thought was the youngest child. They unfortunately died in infancy. Over the years stumbled across some ID cards for some members of the family at the Holocaust Memorial Museum website, and I've also listened to the interviews some of the surviving siblings gave with USC show a visual history foundation. There's a lot more things in those interviews than is acknowledged in the book, and there's also I think a radio, just a audio only interview Isabella gave also, and so it's just added so much to the book, because when I was rereading the book again years later, I first discovered it when the spring of 1995 when I was 15 years old. It stayed with me in great detail ever since, and it struck me that I had never realized Isabella gives fairly few details about her sisters and her experience in Auschwitz. She doesn't talk about, for example, work they did or beatings or really friendships they formed. And I did later find out, because they were in Lager C all the time, it was a transitory camp. Instead of being admitted to the main camp to do work, their ordeal was much worse than if they had submitted to more selections for relatively better. Obviously they were still horrible, but work camps that actually had relatively better treatment and food and real duties they could have done. For example, in a factory they might have had a relatively better experience and not I'm sorry, I'm so rambling, because they were taken to a camp called Birnbaumel, which was in it was in Germany then. It would be in Poland now, I believe, because the borders changed after the war. Poland was really screwed over by the big three, but that's a topic for another post. And say they basically digging tank traps in the woods, and then they were taken on a death march to Bergen-Belsen. But the one of the Isabella's older sisters, Chicha, whose real name was Berta. Chicha is a Hungarian nickname meaning big mouth, which I was wondering for years, what is this a nickname for? I obviously knew the spelling was anglicized. I thought maybe her name was Cecilia or Chila or something like that. No, it was just a nickname they gave her because I guess she must have talked a lot, and so they escaped into a house that was abandoned. There was no smoke coming from the chimney, and several other women also joined them, Polish women. In my hiatus, work in progress, which is called The Strongest Branches of Uprooted Trees, that also begins with a death march escape, which was closely modeled after the one Isabella and her sisters had. But anyway, there are so relative few details about anything graphic in the book, although surprisingly when she did a children's very, very short version of the book called The Big Lie, True Story, it has a lot more graphic details than any of the adult versions of the book did, which is really shocking and surprising considering this is for children, and she's talking about a little girl dying in the death train, or how someone shot at her and her sisters one night. She claims it was Mengele, but probably wasn't. I have a whole blog post about the Mengele trope, people, because he's one of the few names people know, they say he was the one who did all these things because they genuinely don't know any other names, although the facts show obviously he was an evil piece of garbage and should be rightly condemned for everything he did, but he was not some mastermind who was in multiple different parts of the camp all at the same time doing all these different things. So anyway, she has a lot more like graphic, like horrific details in the children's book than in the adult book. But I genuinely like, sorry, I've been rambling so much, but in the adult book, it's like not about a tale of horror, but it's about the love between these four sisters because they survive for one another, like because of one another. And that's, basically what keeps them alive and eventually drives them to escape. And the youngest, the surviving sister, Regina, her name was Regina when they moved to the U.S. And she was originally identified as Rachel in the first printings of the book because she was like so like traumatized from the ordeal. You can definitely see it if you watch the interview with the USC Shoah Foundation. Even years later, she was just like, it really, really profoundly affected her because she was only 15, 16 years old or so at the time, and she really did not want Isabella to use her real name in print because it was just like totally altered her mind, just horrible things they went through. And that is just one of the most influential books for me. Like I've remembered it in detail all these years later. It's like, about love and hope and life. And for a long time, I was considering possibly, if I had like children, using the name Isabella for a potential future daughter after this amazing woman. But as fortunately as you might know, Isabella is, super, super like trendy and popular now. And I wouldn't want people to think I was just, mindlessly using a popular name just because it was popular, even though I loved the name way before it became trendy. And number 6, Little Darling, It's Been a Long, Cold, Lonely Winter. Here Comes the Sun, George Harrison. A book of poetry that you found uplifting. I had to also think a while about this one because, the kinds of poets I like, for example, Yevgeny Yevtushenko, Andrei Voznesensky, Anna Akhmatova, Attila Yozhev, or it might be Yozhev Attila. The Hungarians put the surname before the first name, and like Hebrew poets like Yehuda Amihai, and just poets who Yaroslav Ziffer too, who was a Czech poet. He won the Nobel Prize in 1984. They're not exactly known for being like lighthearted, uplifting. It's all depressing and serious and heavy and philosophical. And even like, for example, Vladimir Mayakovsky or Sergei Yesenin, like Russian different schools of poetry like Futurism and Acmeism, or Alexander Blok. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting like which exact schools all these guys belong to because my Russian anthology of poetry and other stuff unfortunately is also in storage. But they were more, like philosophical and breaking norms again, even if they weren't like super heavy and serious. So I had to think who's a poet I like who does uplifting poetry, and I finally realized, Boris Pasternak, who is he won the Nobel Prize for his novel Dr. Zhivago, although he was primarily known for being a poet, and it does kind of like show in the novel that his first literary experience was poetry and not prose. It's his life story is like really interesting. He kind of saved his own hide during the Great Terror and the Purging because he switched to translating because he realized if I could keep writing honest poetry, I'll get in serious trouble with Stalin. But anyway, many of his poems are about nature and beauty and love. It's not necessarily as deep and tragic and serious as other Russian poets. This is one called White Night. I keep thinking of times that are long past, of a house in the Petersburg quarter. You had come from the steppe-land Kursk province, of a none too rich mother the daughter. You were nice, you had many admirers. On that distant white night we were sitting, on your windowsill, looking from high on the phantom-like scene of the city. The street lamps, like gauze butterflies fluttering, had been touched by the chill of the morning. My soft words, as I opened my heart to you, matched the slumbering vistas before us. We were plighted with timid fidelity to the very same nebulous mystery, as the cityscape spreading unendingly, far beyond the Neva, through the distances, and that far-off impregnable wilderness, wrapped in springtime twilight ethereal. Woodland glades and dense thickets were quivering, with mad nightingales, thunderous paeans. Crazy resonant warbling ran riot, and the voice of this plain-looking songster soughed derangement, ecstatic delight, in the depth of the mesmerized copsewood. To those parts night, a barefoot vagabond, stole its way along ditches and fences, from our windowsill, after it tagging, was the trail of our cooed confidences. To the words of this colloquy echoing, in the orchards beyond the tall palings, spreading branches of apple and cherry trees swathed themselves in their pearly white raiment, and the trees, like so many pale phantoms, waved their farewell along the road thronging to white night, that all-seeing enchanter, who is now to north regions withdrawn. And also something that's always I found very touching about Pasternak, the Andrei Voznesensky, who unfortunately passed away maybe 10-ish years or so ago, who was also a brilliant poet born in 1933. He absolutely idolized Pasternak, and he wrote him a fan letter when he was about 13 years old, and to his great surprise, Pasternak actually showed up at the house and befriended him and became his mentor throughout the rest of his life. And he mentions this friendship lovingly in stories and poems he wrote, and I would hopefully, God willing, maybe I could eventually do that for a younger writer someday, mentor him or her. And this is also one of a very beautiful, heartbreaking, but also ultimately uplifting poem he wrote, Nobel Prize in 1959. I used two of the lines from the poem as chapters in my book, Journey Through a Dark Forest, in Volume 2. The beaters in a ring close in, and the wrong prey in view. It is, a sad, depressing poem, but it does, speak about things that are, uplifting, and seeing, the potential of hope even in the darkness. And unfortunately, I don't know all of the poem by heart, but I do know some parts of it by heart, so I'm going to read it instead of attempting to recite it and stumbling. Like a beast in a pen, I'm cut off. For my friends, freedom the sun. But the hunters are gaining ground. I've nowhere else to run. Dark wood in the bank of a pond. Trunk of a fallen tree. There's no way forward, no way back. It's all up with me. Am I a gangster or a murderer? Of what crime do I stand condemned? I made the whole world weep at the beauty of my land. Even so, one step from my grave, I believe that cruelty, spite, the powers of darkness will in time be crushed by the spirit of light. Beaters in a ring close in, with the wrong prey in view. I've nobody at my right hand, nobody faithful and true. And with such a noose on my throat, I should like for 1 second my tears to be wiped away by someone at my right hand. It's just, one of my favorite poems. It's, just so beautiful. I read that poem at a poetry night I had one time when I was still living in Albany, New York. I also recited the first 12 lines of the Divine Comedy in the Lawrence Binion translation. I also believe I might have recited a Bertold Brecht poem when I was there too. The Burning of the Books, which obviously that's totally a subject for another thing. And number 7, A Day in the Life. An experimental book that's very uncommon for its content or format, and yet it works very well. This, I thought of a book I had read and when I was taking a children's literature class, and when I was studying for a master's degree in information science at UAlbany. This is called Middle School is Worse Than Meatloaf by Jennifer Holm. It's about a girl named Ginny in her 7th grade year, and the book was told, entirely through stuff like, for example, this is her back to school shopping list, and there are other things like her to-do list and essays she's writing for school, and it's all written in this, and not text really. It's just sort of handwriting, or for example a comic book, pizzeria coupons and instant message things, just really interesting thing. Oh yeah, her Christmas list, it's just a really fun book. I would highly encourage you to check it out if you're interested in middle grade, particularly told in non-traditional formats. So here's a report card. It's just so really, really fun. That's not the kind of format you would probably expect from a book, but it works really well and tells a great interesting story about the 7th grade, and probably everyone normal can relate to, unless you were popular from day one of junior high. You never had any problems with your peers or getting good grades and such. Number 8. Over half of Americans who are age 45 and older attribute the Beatles' split to Yoko Ono. A book about a woman, or if you can't think of one, a man, who is unjustly blamed or accused of something. Now, for this one, it's not a fictional book, but I immediately thought of Natasha Rambova. She spelled her name in the French way, so it's a CH instead of an SH. Her birth name was Winifred Shaughnessy, and this is the book Madame Valentino, The Many Lives of Natasha Rambova by Michael Morris. She was the wife of Rudolph Valentino, my favorite actor. For about 2 years, she was his second wife and the great love of his life. She totally broke his heart when they divorced. They were like very compatible, like sexually and spiritually, but unfortunately, they had some things they like strongly disagreed with. Rudy really wanted his, wife to like stay at home in a traditional role and have babies. And there's rumors Natasha had a couple of abortions because she really, really did not want to become a mother at all. And Rudy really badly wanted children, and sadly he never became a father. But they did divorce because their differences became like so irreconcilable. And I've always seen parallels between Natasha Rambova and Yoko Ono. These are either women you like love, like think are like totally cool. Their like art and vision is way ahead of their time, and they're just like unsung geniuses, or you like totally like hate and bash them and like claim they ruined their husbands because these men apparently were like totally helpless and basically falling in love with women like out of without their consent. Like kind of give these guys a little credit for like knowing their own minds. They made an educated decision to like marry these women, and they genuinely love them. You can't just like constantly like blame them because they did things the way you didn't like. So Natasha she started out as a dancer, and then she became a costume designer. That's how she and Rudy met. And unfortunately, because they married before Rudy's divorce from his first wife, Jean Acker, which was never consummated, was finalized. Rudy was jailed for bigamy, and some of his actor friends had to help bail him out of prison. And Natasha had like a really interesting like costume design set for movies, and that's one of the reasons Rudy stepped away from movies for about a year and a half. He was on strike for movies, and they went on a dance tour to pay the bills in the meantime because he wasn't getting good enough roles. And so, Natasha wanted to push him to get like better stuff, and until that could happen, they went on strike. And then there was this ambitious project called the Hooded Falcon, which never came to reality. A lot of people thought it was like too ambitious, and so Rudy had a break with his surrogate mother, June Mathis, who had like really helped him to stardom. She was like an extremely influential screenwriter of the era, and just so there's lots of parallels between Yoko and Natasha. They had like extremely unusual like artistic visions. Their relationships with their most famous husbands were like criticized because people didn't understand their love or why they would be together. And I would highly recommend you to like check out the biography of Natasha. Unfortunately, it's out of print now, but you can like read other things about her. And she was just like a really interesting woman out of her time. And in her later years, she got more into like Egyptology and all sorts of like spiritualism and esoteric mystical things. So like she was just more than just Madame Valentino. She was like a really interesting, artistic, like passionate woman who had all sorts of like interesting things. I'm sorry, I'm rambling again. Number 9, limitless, undying love, which shines around me like a million suns and calls me on and on across the universe. John Lennon. A book that opened your mind and made you think of the universe in a new way, either physically or spiritually. This would be another Hermann Hesse book, Damien, which I read for the first time when I was 14, finished reading it when I was 15, which was the first fully like real adult book I ever read. I found it in my father's old books in my room. That's how I discovered Hesse. And it's Damien isn't the main character. The main character, the narrator, is Emile Sinclair. His buddy Max Damien is the title character. He really opens Sinclair's mind to a whole new way of being, even when they're not physically together. He's away at boarding school for a while, and one of the most interesting things in the book is what we would call a midrash in Judaism, like an extrapolation of like what's in the Torah text. So the Damien has like a midrash on the mark of Cain. He's basically saying it's but besides what the Bible story says, it's you can interpret it to see it's like a mark of a nonconformist, someone special, someone who's unafraid to go against the grain. And like later when like Sinclair finishes school and comes back to his old town and hooks back up with Damien and meets Damien's mother Ava, they have a whole society group of people who they feel are bearing the mark of Cain because they're so different from society. And also introduced me to the idea of Abraxas, a deity who's like half god and half devil. And this like little note Damien sends to Sinclair, like saying the bird fights its way out of the nest. The bird is God. The bird is like Abraxas, and like to be born one most first destroy world. I'm sorry, I'm not getting that quote right. It has been a while since I read the book, but that's the general gist of it, and there's just all sorts of interesting mystical ideas throughout the book, and just I can't really do it justice unless you read it. But it was Hesse's breakthrough novel written in 1919, and it's all been one of my like favoriteest books like ever for a really long time. Although it's under 200 pages, it's really like deep and profound and moving. I would highly recommend it. Number 10. Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom. Let it be. Paul McCartney about Let It Be. A book that you found very profound and moving despite its apparent simplicity. Well, I've had a previous video about the Tao Te Ching, which is one of my most special, meaningful, emotional books, and I'm not going to repeat everything I said there, but I've referenced it in a number of my own books many times over the years. There are just so many wonderful things in the book. It's just simple things, and there are wonderful pictures throughout the book, just black and white photography, and chapter 31 has been particularly meaningful to me as a pacifist, and I've also quoted this in several of my books. Good weapons are instruments of fear. All creatures hate them. Therefore, followers of Tao never use them. The wise man prefers the left. The man of war prefers the right. Weapons are instruments of fear. They are not a wise man's tools. He uses them only when he has no choice. Peace and quiet are dear to his heart, and victory no cause for rejoicing. If you rejoice in victory, then you delight in killing. If you delight in killing, you cannot fulfill yourself. On happy occasions, precedence is given to the left. On sad occasions, to the right. In the army, the general stands on the left, the commander-in-chief on the right. This means that war is conducted like a funeral. When many people are being killed, it should be mourned in heartfelt sorrow. That is why a victory must be observed like a funeral. Here is another one. Always liked 61. A great country is like low land. It is the meeting ground of the universe, the mother of the universe. The female overcomes the male with stillness, lying low in stillness. Therefore, if a great country gives way to a smaller country, it will conquer the smaller country. And if a small country submits to a great country, it can conquer the great country. Therefore, those who would conquer must yield, and those who conquer do so because they yield. A great nation needs more people. A small country needs to serve. Each gets what it wants. It is fitting for a great nation to yield. And it's just full of such wonderful, beautiful maxims and this gorgeous black and white photography, and the chapters written in the original ancient Chinese. Obviously, I don't understand a word of Chinese or ancient Chinese, but I just love looking at them, and just I had to print out this stuff. The two of the chapters, unfortunately, for some weird reason, were untranslated in my version, so I printed them out when I finally found them my senior year of university, and I didn't write them in the pages because I just don't write in books. That's just not something I do ever done. I'm look at this beautiful, gorgeous photography. I highly recommend this translation, which has been with me all these years, by Gia Fu Feng and Jane English, for many, many reasons. This is just one of the most special books to me. It's never physically been out of my custody since I took it from my parents' collection with permission in January 1996 when I was 16 years old. Yes, believe it or not, I'm that old. So, thank you very much for listening to the end. This turned out much longer than I had anticipated, but this was an entirely unscripted video for me, except for writing down the names of the books and what I wanted to talk about. So hopefully I will see you guys again very soon. I'm planning my next video for the January 27th. I will be discussing this book, the Auschwitz Chronicle, which is a very detailed day-by-day thing to commemorate the liberation of that camp. So obviously not looking forward to a topic with such a serious and depressing book, but obviously you can look ahead to that topic coming up, and I will be maybe doing some more Dantean posts next week. Maybe I can try again to do the Franz Liszt Symphony of Dante's Divine Comedy. I had originally did that video a few weeks ago, but it turned out unusable garbage because my microphone went bluey and started picking up this really loud hissing white noise in the background, and ever since then I have had to record on my computer because the microphone and the iPad is no longer working. So please, thank you very much for listening. Please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, and commenting, and see you guys again very soon. Thanks. Bye.